Hi, I'm Andy Murray. Welcome to It's a Customer's World podcast. Now more than ever, retailers and brands are accelerating their quest to be more customer-centric. But to be truly customer-centric, it requires both a shift in mindset and ways of working, not just in marketing, but in all parts of the organization. In this podcast series, I'll be talking with practitioners, thought leaders, and scholars to hear their thoughts on what it takes to be a leader in today's customer-centric world. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of It's a Customer's World. Today, I'm excited to have with me a returning guest and my British friend, Simon Miles. Simon is the Vice President of Global Omnichannel Commercial Strategy at the Coca-Cola Company. Now, in full disclosure, I've been working with Simon since, I believe, October of last year, exploring how Coca-Cola can better understand and leverage this rapidly evolving space of retail media networks through a global lens. In those early conversations, the idea emerged of getting deeper insights on how the space is evolving from other industry experts. And that led to the collaboration with the University of Arkansas's Walton College of Business and their efforts to better understand how the industry sees the promise of these retail networks, the reality of where we are today, and what is needed in the future. Their findings were recently published in a white paper. You can find in a link in the show notes. Today, we'll hear Simon's take on this journey and how some of the insights from the white paper apply to his work at Coca-Cola. Hey, Simon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Andy, it's great to be here again. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah, well, today's going to be a lot of fun. It's been a long journey to get to this point, but I'm excited. What I'd like to do is start with you introducing yourself and sharing a bit about your career journey that's led to this role you're in today, and a bit about what your role entails.
Yeah, thanks. So as you said in the setup, I lead our omnichannel customer work at Coca-Cola, but it has been quite a long and circuitous route to get there. When I look at my career path, it's probably not one that you would write down at the start of your career, but it's been a fantastic journey. And I think some of the things that enable me to do the job I've got now, I've been with the Coca-Cola system 16 years. I've done a number of different roles through that time, including things like shopper marketing, which I think really taught me around, customer journey planning and those kind of things, which I still use today, a lot of the thinking behind that. I spent time in the customer management team here in the UK on customers like Sainsbury's and Waitrose and others. And I think part of that helped me to understand, collaboration, customer leadership, that kind of area. And certainly then when I moved into more digital roles, which I've held for on and off for the last 10 years or so. It's given me a lot deeper understanding of, how you execute in the modern world, the pace of change, keeping up with that, and how, again, you collaborate with customers like Walmart International, for example, which I was on our Walmart International team for a number of years. So lots of different kind of experiences and roles, but all of them, I think, are contributing and helping me do the role I have today.
Well, clearly there's some themes in that seems to be relevant to what you're doing today, like how do you get collaboration? Clearly the shopper marketing world is changing, but has so many good principled tenets that you learn through experience that seems to be really relevant to today's world. You're in an interesting role as you see the commercial space between brands and retailers from a global perspective. And let's talk about that for a second. What surprised you most when looking across 9 different operating units you engage with?
Yeah, I think actually the biggest surprise probably was the similarities. It was how similar the discussions were, whether you're talking to, our team in India, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in North America or Europe. Actually, the fundamental challenges we're trying to solve are the same, and we had a call not that long ago actually, where we were talking a lot about some of the work that's going on in North America, which is fantastic. And my colleague from the India team said, "Hey, I thought you were talking about India." So it just shows you how common sort of some of the stuff is. And I think it's just a case of us trying to work together to be more consistent, I think, around what our approach is. Because I definitely think it's going to help everybody. So I think that was the key thing, was actually not so much about differences, but about similarities that people are facing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think from a North America chair, we often look at Asia as being so much more advanced in some of these technologies. And I think what you find is, yes,
Mhm.
in some ways in terms of tactics and execution, but the organizational impact, how you collaborate, what does it look like in terms of workflows and such,
Yeah.
seem to be more similar than we probably imagine.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's easy, I think, to sort of look over the garden fence at what everybody else is doing and assume it's better or more advanced or whatever. And the reality is, there's pockets of great work everywhere, and there's pockets of areas that are underdeveloped everywhere. And so, that's why I think the whole collaboration thing is so important, because only by doing that can we all kind of learn together. And so, we're certainly taking that, and I think that's not just internally, where there are still, to a degree, even though we're pretty networked as a global organization, we've still got, silos that are working that don't necessarily connect and communicate as well as they could in other areas. And from what I'm understanding, I think the same is true also within retail organizations, where you have that sort of silos that are still a challenge, even in today's kind of pretty interconnected world.
Well, that certainly was my experience at Walmart and Asda, is that, these are big organizations flying at the speed of light and
Yeah,
being able to stay connected through communication and leveraging technology to do that and workflows. It's a constant challenge for retail and CPG, and probably something is underestimated in terms of trying to drive change when you're in such a rapidly changing space. Uh,
yeah.
Speaking of that a bit, as you look at the world of CPG beyond Coke, and reaching shoppers via omni-channel, what do you see are the big opportunities and challenges for some of the bigger brands, maybe international brands like Coke?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on a couple of them. I definitely think that whole kind of silos within your organization is a big challenge. So, how you think about the amending your processes and updating your processes, the way you work together and more collaborative with your customers, keeping the sort of consumer in mind, is definitely, I think, one of the big challenges. As is the speed of change that you sort of referenced there. I mean, this thing is moving fast, right? I mean, we've been looking at it for a couple of years or so, and wow, it's amazing how many more organizations are revolutionizing the way they do business and building out capabilities. And so keeping on top of that, I think, is a massive challenge. And therefore, I think the opportunity goes with that is around upskilling. There's a
Hmm.
huge, in my view, there's a huge sort of educational piece to this, which is I sort of think of it in almost sort of three levels, really. One is, how do you make sure that your senior leadership are really on top of it, understand what the implications might be? And then what about the people who are hands-on doing this work, working in the digital space and others with customers? And then, what about everybody else in the organization, where it'll have an impact no matter what part of the organization you're sitting in? And so it's important to bring them on the journey with us. And so I think, those definitely are two of them. But the other one I'd throw in the mix, I think, is about data and
Hmm.
sort of making data count, if you like. Because I think we've all got lots of data, but it's not necessarily connected. It's not necessarily always transparent to the pieces of the business you need it to be. And again, that's even more complex than when you start to think about, the customer data that the retailers have and the consumer data that perhaps some of the brands have. And so that ability, the opportunity to collaborate, I think, around data in particular, is a really big one. So I think those three are probably the biggest areas that I see right now. But there's huge opportunities, I think, around education and collaboration that should really get us where we need to get to around it.
Well, speaking of education, you were instrumental in initiating the guidance to the University of Arkansas's Walton College of Business research work into
Mm.
retail media networks and the recently published white paper. What were you hoping to accomplish by being involved in this effort?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic project to be part of. I think very simply, it was about a better understanding of this space. Because the reality is, there's lots of literature, there's lots of articles written, lots of content that you can go and find. But really what we were looking for, I think, was a balanced academic approach. And so that was something we thought was different and that would really kind of cut through some of the noise in this space. And of course, the University of Arkansas that we've been working with, they've got a proven history here, working with suppliers, retailers, they've facilitated stuff, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a few years back on RFID, which was a really big sort of breakthrough in that sort of supply chain space. And so they've got a lot of competency, a lot of focus around this kind of whole space of retailers and how they connect them to the supplier community. So they seem to us to be an ideal partner to kind of really get that understanding of, let's talk to a whole range of people, who are experts, a more senior audience perhaps, and get a balanced view. So it was really a piece that was just going to fuel our understanding in the space and help us understand what do we need to do then to make this right and get this right.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on the literature. I mean, many of the pieces I read really do a great job of articulating the promise of what could be done and
Mm.
a nature of a world that is more relevant consumer experiences and so on and so forth. But what probably gets underestimated or underreported, underwritten about is a candid look at the difficulty, the dive that's in front
Yeah.
of organizations with so much change. You've read the white paper. What are your initial reactions to the findings?
Yeah, it was a good read actually. I mean, it was super useful to sort of get that collective thoughts, if you like, of senior execs from across CPG and retail together. And I think there were a couple of things really. I mean, I think what came through quite strongly was this notion of there's pretty wide sort of cross-industry support about the promise of what a retail media network could be. Things like the use of first-party data, closed-loop reporting, that if handled right, can deliver a fantastic shopping experience for consumers. And of course, in the end, they're the bosses that we're all working for. And so that came through, I think, quite strongly. But of course, what also struck me was the piece that was the section that really looked at about what the reality is like. And the reality is pretty messy right now.
Mhm.
We're in the middle of this kind of innovation towards the promise, but there's so many challenges that some of them we talked about already around upskilling, how do you build more efficient ways of working, that sort of organizational silo piece, and then the measurement capabilities are not quite there yet, or they're at least very different in terms of some organizations are pretty good in that space and pretty strong. Some are not so much, and it's a development area. Some of them are, willingly sharing, others are not. So there was lots to go after in that space. But I thought what was great about the paper was that having kind of laid that picture out of promise and reality, it was then okay. Well, what's the journey look like then? How do you get through this to bring the promise to life? And it was talking about collaboration. It was talking about transparency and consistency across the industry, particularly around sort of even simple things like definitions or standards. That was kind of for me some of the standout things when I first kind of started to look through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. What the thing that struck me from the white paper is just how many retail media networks are being launched. I read somewhere 600
Mm.
are now already in play. And the unintended consequence of that is if you're a brand owner, CPG, marketer,
Mm.
and trying to harmonize all of those opportunities and where it's a completely different way of working, different metrics to get used to and understand. It's not an easy space. So I think perhaps putting my older retail hat on, you kind of see you as a retailer in the market in the CPG, but sometimes don't understand the complexity that these bring that still needs to be worked through and will get worked through. But it's not an easy process to sort all that out from a technology perspective, dashboards, being able to see where's my investment working, where can it be improved. Those are uh, those are levels of complexity that have just been exponentially amplified in this space. What do you think is needed for stakeholders, and not just CPG, but we look at the consumer, you look at the retailer, you look at the CPG. What are some of the
Mm.
things you think are really needed for stakeholders to realize that promise of more relevant consumer experience and value creation for the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking sort of long and hard really since the white paper got published about what it is we really need to do because um, the, one of the key things I think is that no one company's got the solution to this. That came through kind of loud and clear, and I think what you were just saying is right. There's a lot of complexity here, but I think, and I've started to form a little model in my mind, which is seven C's, right? Not the water thing, but seven things that start with the letter C. The first one being consumer focus. I think that's, we've all got to remember actually the point of this whole area of development is about how do we give people an improved customer experience or consumer experience. Whatever we do has to make it better, I think, for the end users at the end of the day. Otherwise, it kind of everything fails. But I think, the second C would be collaboration, and we talked a little bit about this. But I think it really is an opportunity to give a new partnership model almost for growth, which is how do we work together to solve some of these issues, even across, non-competing CPGs and retailers, or just, from an individual CPG with retailers as well. But there's a massive opportunity here to collaborate together to define how does this work properly, how best do we solve it. And I think, some of the areas that we would be looking to solve, clarity is one, and I think that's about data and, platform-specific data, closed-loop reporting. How do we get to a world in which that's the way in which we operate, so that it's fact-based? We're kind of one version of the truth. Everybody's trying to, solve the same issues. So I think that's really key to get after. I also think the capability point is really important here. So upskilling, as I was saying earlier, senior audiences, people who are sort of practitioners on the ground, as well as the kind of general folk who are working across our collective businesses. But ultimately we're in this to make business, right? And so having a commercial mindset, looking for commercial outcomes, I think is really going to be key. And I think that's where the data will help us, I think, to fill in some of the gaps that exist today around what is the ROI you're really looking for? Is that really clear? Because this is broader than just, old-fashioned shopper marketing metrics that you and I, Andy, might have been, familiar with in the old days. That retains some relevance, but it's also now, if it's brand objectives and ROAS and that kind of stuff, how do you meld this together to get the right set of metrics around and be able to use those to target properly the right solutions for our consumers? And then I think the final two, one is consistency. So how do we get this more consistent? Because a lot of these networks not equal, and by any means, as you say, there's like 600 of these things. So how do you make choices as a brand in terms of where your investment needs to go, and how do we help an industry kind of grow together so that we get more consistency of metrics and what works and what gets offered? And then the final thing I think is about conducting trials, because I think it's still early days. That was one of the things that came through from the white paper, was this is still very early. It's a bit Wild West. We don't really know all the answers. So I think it's wise to go into it with the mindset of saying, I'm going to conduct some trials and some partnerships and some experiments here to learn as we go and iterate from there, rather than assume we can kind of all crack it in one go. So a lot to remember there, but that's kind of, I think, some of the things that really is the things we would focus on in terms of being able to fulfill that promise.
That's excellent. I love your framing of that. And I'm hearing some of those themes come through in other speakers and folks that talk about this space. Love listening to the CPG guys cover retail media networks. They do a great job of bringing in guests, and Kantar Insight work that has a podcast. I just listened to SVP of Kroger, KPM, their lead for this space, and she was calling out the opportunity for consistency in language and consistency in metrics as a way for an unlock to get more efficient growth. So it's not just, I think, the CPG community that sees that, where one retailer will have a different way of thinking about ROAS as a metric versus others, and then you're trying to harmonize those metrics across that portfolio. It's quite difficult. and it
Yeah.
slows growth. It actually slows things down when you don't have a common language. And I think it's, to be honest, I do think, retailers, some that are more mature in this space see it. Clearly, from my experience in the UK, at Asda and working with the
Mm.
folks at Sainsbury's and Tesco, the other thing I think that they do a good job of, and they're probably about 4 or 5 years in front of where some of the other markets are because of such a high penetration in e-commerce, and they've been working in this space a bit longer.
Mm.
They have developed a pretty strong mentality that the client, there's a client here that is the supplier, and we have to really listen to how do we sort through their complex worlds. And often, that's a hard mind shift for some retails to
Yeah.
take that position because it's always been in the buyer mode. But these operations typically sit outside of merchandising, and it's a different type of whole ecosystem and culture. So I feel like from what I've read in the white paper and my own conversations and having the ear to the ground to the industry, we're starting to see some really common themes that have an opportunity to be addressed at an industry level, which I hope starts to emerge. Um, what what are some of the specific actions that you'll be taking on encouraging Coke to look at as a result of the white paper?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you were just talking about there in terms of how we need to collaborate with retailers, because I think it's it's part of a broader development area, actually. I think around this whole kind of as ecosystems build, the old notion of having an account man go in from a supplier and negotiate everything with a buyer is kind of dead, really. I think that's not the way to do it. I think it has to be much broader than that, much more cross-functional, particularly in this area we're talking about. So certainly, I think a couple of things we'll be taking from the white paper specifically on that is how do we use this to further our collaboration efforts with retailers who want to collaborate in that way, and also accelerate our internal kind of cross-functional collaboration so that we're better prepared. We walk in with a more joined up approach in terms of not just our marketing programs, what our account teams are trying to agree as well, and sort of join those things up much better. So definitely that whole kind of collaboration piece, both internally and externally, is a conversation I've been having for a little while because of the broader piece, but specifically this will accelerate that. I think another one is definitely increasing the education and upskilling piece in this space to make sure that we're sort of maximizing value, ensuring we've got the right sort of strategic approach here to reach our objectives. Because I think done properly, what excites me the most is this can be a real accelerator on the velocity of
Hmm.
growth. And boy, do we all need that right now, right? In an inflationary environment with lots of uncertainty, I think we have the ability to be really smart and joined up and accelerate, the growth for us and our retailer partners as well. And then I think, finally, the other area that I'll focus heavily on, I think, is the sort of test and learn process that we have. Make sure that we're sharing, we're building on best practices globally. And I was saying it earlier, that whole surprise almost of how similar everything is, no matter where you are, just reinforce the need for us to have a much more joined up approach and say, well, let's learn this once and share it across the globe because everybody's going to benefit from this. And we accelerate the learning and we build the skills and the knowledge levels for everyone much more quickly by doing it that way.
Wow, I love that. I love the approach. One of the things we don't talk about much in retail media networks and technology and such is an area that is really important to drive change, and that is the mindset required to lead through driving this type of change. It can be really disconcerting if you're trying to make investment decisions, you're not really sure. You don't really trust yourself sometimes if that decision is going to give you the outcome because it's new. It's you're trying new things. Let's take a few minutes and just talk about leadership and the mindset required to lead through change. Because it is a factor in this is a great example where a big change is happening, no doubt about it. It's happening at a global level, but you can't really just work through it on laying out processes and methods. You also have to have a frame in your mind about how you're going to approach it from a leadership perspective. So, what are your thoughts
Yeah,
on
yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we've it's interesting because again, I think it's part of although it's specific to retail media networks and this sort of area, I think it's a broader piece and a broader approach. In such an uncertain time, you have to have a growth mindset that we have here, which involves things like iterative test and learn, increased collaboration globally. We work very much in a networked way at Coke. We restructured ourselves really quite early on in the after the pandemic came along, and thought long and hard about how do we want to work together and what's the most effective way to do that. And part of that was about us being happy with taking more risks, being happy that we would see more things failing, but as long as you learn from it and move on, then that's absolutely fine. And so having that kind of more open, transparent way of operating, I think absolutely applies to this area as well as the sort of broader piece. So we're absolutely trying to kind of live by that, and we're very fortunate. Our CEO has been talking about that for many years now, in terms of that's what he's expecting from us, that if we're not taking risks, we're not trying hard enough, we've got to kind of expect to see some failures along the way. And whether that's your innovation pipeline, whether that's technology, whether it's this kind of area, just to embrace it early, get out there and do some stuff and learn as you go. Not everything has to be 100% perfect before you launch it. So we're certainly nowhere near 100% here. So we'll start to move on some of the things that we've been talking about today, and hope that we can get to the right place with the help of others. Staying kind of focused on that, staying with the sort of learning mindset. It's interesting, as a sort of small aside, and my role, where I'm supposed to be the in-house expert, I spend an awful lot of time externally focused, because that's where you're going to learn, isn't it? By talking to other companies, talking to agency partners, talking to conferences and that kind of stuff. That's where you pick up the latest thinking. And so we definitely are kind of open-minded and externally focused in that sense too, that helps us to understand and to learn more quickly. So we'll be applying all of that kind of approach, I think, as we go forward on the retail media space.
Well, that's really interesting, and I love the way you're looking at it from a open mindset, test and learn. Have that willingness to fail fast, learn fast. One of the things you and I've talked about in the past is the importance of getting really clear on what's the outcome we want. We can get really tied up into, well, what we need is this deliverable. Maybe it's a playbook, or maybe it is a framework of some sort, and that's a tick box outcome. But really, the outcomes in this world of change is that whatever we do is working, and to shape that up, so to say, actually what we want is a framework that people use that actually find helpful, and to go that extra mile to understand, hey, we're trying something new. Is it working? Being open to feedback and saying, you know what, you provided me some guidance and help, and boy, it made a real difference in my relationship with the retailer, my effectiveness of the campaign I ran, or whatever it is. But just continue to close that loop to say, are we getting the outcomes we want? And being willing to adjust that path along the way until we get to that outcome space. And so, what's your thoughts on the importance of outcomes?
Yeah, I completely agree. You're right. You and I have sort of talked about this at some length. I think you have to go in thinking, I know what I'm trying to get to here, and so we definitely have that sort of feedback loop sort of built into the work we do, and that's one of the reasons we try and share consistently across that. And we have a phrase, rather than thinking about things that are best practices and things that haven't worked, it's growth practices, right? Everything is a growth opportunity. And so even if it didn't work the way you wanted against the outcomes you set, well, what did you learn from it? And that's what we use to then move forward. And in this space, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for test and learn experiments to help accelerate that. And as we've found more similarities and differences in terms of the current state of play, then it makes so much sense, I think, to use that kind of mindset. And help us navigate through this, because it's complex. As we were saying earlier, there's complexity on the retailer side. There's complexity in our businesses. There's lots of these things. There's over 600 networks. So just navigating your way through that. You've got to be clear on saying, okay, this is what I'm expecting. These are the standards I want. These are the metrics I'm looking for. This is the kind of ROI I'm looking for. So the sooner we can get to those kind of things, I think we'll all be in a better space. But I think we've got to try and one of the things that this white paper I think is alluding to is how do we try and do that as an industry? How do we get
Mm.
everybody kind of onto the same page so that we don't get this fragmentation and something that's hard to navigate? We've got to reduce the complexity and bring simplicity to the topic if we can.
Well, I agree with you. I think, the one thing I read through the white paper that I found really encouraging is the promise of being able to really use closed loop reporting and first party data to give that consumer a much more relevant experience is a really exciting promise. And the more we keep the industry focused on that outcome, where we're trying to go, I think the faster we'll get there, and the more consistency we'll see across different areas, transparency, and all the elements that add value for all the stakeholders. So I'm excited. I think it's a great space. It's a great time to be in the space. I still think some of the shopper marketing principles are part of the solution in this space as we move from the way we've been looking at e-commerce and data and item level stuff to more of what can grow a category. What are the real consumer insights? And so I hope you get to leverage some of that great shopper marketing background into this space of retail media networks, as I'm a diehard shopper marketing guy, and maybe I'm a dinosaur, I don't know yet, but we'll find out, I suppose.
No way. Absolutely, no. It's great. I mean, I just look at that as it built for both of us. It's such a solid base to have that kind of thinking and the approach in terms of what's right for the shoppers and what makes the transaction happen. And like you, I feel very excited and positive about the potential here of what this promise offers for us. I think, as with all emerging spaces, it seems hard to begin with, and it is hard, but you get there in the end. And I think I'm super excited about the opportunity to kind of work on that for Coke and with others. I'm sure in the industry as time goes on. But yeah, it's an exciting space to be in, and particularly the broader kind of e-commerce space as well. There's so many interesting aspects to that, and this is just one of those dimensions that's continuing to drive, I think, the emergence of the e-commerce space as well. So super exciting, and yeah, can't wait to get cracking on it.
Well, you know what? The other piece that I found quite interesting, as you stated that way, is most people I find enjoy a big challenge. They want to be working on something big and difficult, and this definitely qualifies. And what'll be fun is to look back at the end of the career, and hopefully that's a long way off for you. Maybe not so much for me, but be able to look back and say, with the team, you've got a great team. That was a wild west fun experience, and we did it. We solved it. We really moved the needle forward, and those are the kind of stories you talk about in your career. When you get to the other side, when you've gone through something, new, exciting, and challenging. So again, change is a great opportunity for leadership and what it does to purpose, and wow, great purpose out there for an outcome that's a better experience for consumers. So hopefully you're seeing that play through with the excitement in your teams. And I think that's important for everybody to understand. Change can be a great motivator to get people excited and move forward, and then have something in their highlight reel of their career that they're really proud of.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I mean, we both got a bit of snow on the roof, Andy. So neither of us are spring chickens, but it's definitely one of the most interesting challenges I've had in my career, for sure. But who wants a boring life where you repeat stuff over and over, right? You've got to take on some of these challenges to figure it out, because that's where the sort of satisfaction in your career comes from. I think in solving some of these big issues. And as you say, we've got some amazing talent, in our business that's really focused on that, and I'm enjoying working with them. So yeah, it gives you a real buzz, I think, when you have one of these big areas come along through your career, and you say, right, we've got to crack this. And if we do so, it'll be a real legacy piece. That's the way you kind of look at it, I think.
Well, I guess folks can tell why I enjoy working with Simon. Similar attitude toward life, and I think it's a healthy attitude to take on in this kind of change. I've so enjoyed speaking with you on this. I'm glad that we've gotten to this point of being able to look at the industry in a fresh new way and the challenges. And again, just thank you again for all the time you've spent working on trying to make change for the industry, and more importantly, taking Coke to a real space of leadership, which I think is fantastic. So thanks again for the time today.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's been a real pleasure to spend a bit of time with you again.
That's it for this episode of It's a Customer's World. If you found this helpful and entertaining, I would be so grateful if you could share our show with your friends, and I'd be super happy if you subscribe so you can be updated as we publish new episodes. And if you really want to help, leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. It's a Customer's World podcast is a product of the University of Arkansas's Customer-Centric Leadership Initiative and a Walton College original production.